Friends, this is my 27th Easter as a pastor. And because my first congregation had sunrise services and I felt as if I had to write a different sermon for each of those services, I think this is probably my 31st Easter sermon. And if this is my 31st Easter sermon, it also happens to be the 91st Easter service at Montclair Presbyterian Church, not counting any sunrise services that may or may not have taken place back in the day. What's more, this Easter would have been the 50th anniversary of the Barrel House Jazz's first playing for us. And in my 30 years, and in the church's 90 years, and in the Barrel House Band's 50 years, I don't think anyone imagined there would be an Easter quite like this one. Worshipping online is not the fulfillment of anyone's Easter dreams. And if you're like me, then you are feeling a little bit wistful as you remember the joyful noise of a full sanctuary singing Jesus Christ is risen today and greeting one another with the words, Christ is risen indeed. It's hard not being with you in person on this day of joy. But I am glad we can be together technologically. Now, one of the reasons I'm sad about not having our Easter celebration in the sanctuary this year is that the flowers in front of the church are in top form right now. They're amazing. The dogwood, the ornamental pear, the princess tree, the Lady Banks rose, all the floral Easter glory is on display, and I know you would love seeing it, especially this Sunday. Now, I'm filming this sermon on Thursday when the weather is still wintry and cold, but the promise from those who study the weather is that Sunday will be glorious, that Sunday actually is glorious. Sunday is glorious because you are watching this on Sunday. So, given all the sunshine and wonderful flowers at the church, you may be asking yourself why I am standing in my garden on a cold and cloudy Thursday in front of an apple tree that is only just starting to leaf and flower. Well, the answer to that question is that this apple tree matches my mood this Easter. And I think it also matches the spirit of Easter found in Mark's version of the resurrection story, which Linda Spencer read to us from her place of shelter in the Sierra Nevada. This is a tree that I prune every January. And every time I prune this tree, I'm pretty sure I killed it. I never really believe it is still alive and not seriously damaged until well into the spring when new growth is shooting up and apples are starting to set on the branches. Even now, when there are a few leaves on the trees and the buds are just starting to peek out, I still don't really believe that I didn't kill the tree in January. I've been alerted to the tree's victory over my pruning shears, but part of me still believes that my incompetence as a gardener is stronger than the tree's God-given ability to come back to life in the spring. And I sort of think this tree is like Mark's telling of the resurrection story in the gospel. In the Gospels of Matthew and Luke and John, and in the letters of Paul, the risen Lord makes a personal appearance. People touch him, they talk to him, they eat with him, but not in Mark. In Mark's gospel, the angel announces the resurrection and the women see the empty tombs. Just like they see the first buds on my apple tree, but the story ends before their fear ends. The story ends before their doubting ends. The story ends before they bear witness to the living Christ. And to be honest, that's kind of how I feel when I think of gathering in worship with you again once we've been together and we're allowed to venture forth into the world without restriction. I know that day will come. I know that the first Sunday back in our sanctuary will feel a little bit like a resurrection. I have no idea what the world will look like on that day, a day which I hope comes soon. I don't know how many lives will have been touched by the virus. I don't know what the state of the economy will be, but I do know this. I know there will be joy because Christ is risen. The resurrection story that lives at the root of our Christian faith is a promise. It is a promise that life is stronger than death, It's a promise that joy abides even in the face of sadness. It is a promise that hope is possible even in times of great uncertainty. The sun rises after the dark of night. Winter turns to spring. Dormant trees return to leaf. The sun makes its way out from behind the clouds. Christ is risen indeed. Now, I've been talking about resurrection and the coming into our social isolation as it relates to our congregational life. But of course, resurrection is much bigger than Montclair Presbyterian Church. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed in your life. Christ is risen in our communities. Christ is risen in our city and in our state and in our nation and in our world. We will get through this pandemic. We will emerge from our places of shelter and into communities that are vibrant and warm. We will walk in the sun. We will dance in the streets. We will share meals with out-of-town guests. All that wonderful stuff, it's going to happen again in the fullness of time because Christ is risen. And because Christ is risen indeed, the love of the living God moves in us and through us and all around us. Of course, sometimes the good news of the resurrection comes to us like it came to the women in Mark's version of the story of the resurrection. Sometimes it's a promise that doesn't feel very real. That certainly is how Easter feels to me this year. It is the tree that's only starting to bud. It is the promise of sunshine that will arrive the day after tomorrow. But the good news is that resurrection is the work of the Holy One. It has nothing to do with how I feel or how you feel. The fear of the women at the empty tomb in Mark's Gospel did not make the tomb any less empty. My certainty that I've killed this tree with my pruning shears did not make it less alive. And it will not keep it dead 3 weeks from now. The gloomy skies today will not prevent sunshine from making glorious the Easter Sunday. No uncertainty of global pandemic will hold back the love that we share. Love that will bring us together at our church, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, at home with our friends and family from whom we've been separated, or out in the community. For God's loving Spirit is not in human control. Christ is risen, and the one who is risen indeed will see us through. And even if now we're afraid and we're filled with doubt, Christ is risen anyway. And we will be filled with joy. We will be strengthened by hope. We will have courage. And we will be showered with love. And the day will come, hopefully sooner rather than later, when joy and hope and courage and love are things we share together as we meet face to face in community and recognize the risen Christ in the eyes of each beloved child of God.